Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to have so many of you on the call. This evening, our Radley Then and Now talk will look at life in Radley College in the 1960s. The 60s are remembered as an era of rebellion and transformation in science, society, and the arts. But did these revolutions cause ripples on College Pond? Were Radleians taking giant leaps, twisting and shouting, or boldly going where no Radleian had gone before? We are looking forward to hearing from you. Before we move on, just a few housekeeping items for you. Please keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking. That's just to keep the disturbance on the call down, like that. It's an interactive event though, so we do encourage you to chip in and raise your hand. So please feel free to share your stories. There's a chat function at the bottom of your screen if you would rather type a message rather than speak. And finally, just please note that we will be recording the event and we will make it available on YouTube and on our website so that people who aren't able to join us today can watch it at a later stage. So I am absolutely delighted to hand you over to our archivist, Clare Sargent. Over to you, Clare.
Hello, Sophie. Thank you very much. We had a little bit of discussion before we started as to which of us was going to say, if you were in the 1960s and you can remember it, you definitely weren't there. I drew the short straw on that one, so that's what we're going to talk about. We're thinking about life in the 1960s. What we're going to do is we've got some photographs from school in at that period. I'm just going to go through them thematically, but we're also going to think about this a little bit in chronological order, because there are a lot of things that happened in the 1960s which must have had some form of impact on your lives as schoolboys when you were here. And one of the things that struck me as I was going through, I worked through the Radleian, through the New Radleian, through the Patreon, through Silosis, all of those magazines that you were writing yourselves to pick out ideas and to pick out what was the mood of the time. And there is a slight difference between all of them as to what they focused on. And hopefully I'm picking out a lot of those. But as Sophie said, just chip in. If we don't see you waving your hand or putting up your little hand sign, just unmute yourself and yell so that we actually make sure that you're included in the conversation. It is a conversation, so please do. I'm very pleased to welcome also Michael Meredith and Hamish Aird, both here representing your dons. And they can give us the other side of the story from that, which a lot of people are going to have. The Radleian in 1959 started with an editorial in October 1959, which said, "Public schools are an out-of-date institution, an obsolete relic of an outmoded culture. Radley is becoming increasingly interested in the trends, problems, and achievements of the contemporary scene. The jazz band and the orchestra flourish side by side. The Marionette Society and the Amateur Dramatic Society coexist, and the glass and concrete new buildings rise beside the red brick." So we're going to start to look. You should now have something fairly psychedelic on your screen. But alongside that whole story, there is the common market, there's CND marches, there's the assassination of JFK, there's the space race, there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, all of those things which we really just want to have a look at and see what you thought of any of those. And so we're going to start. Again, what was it like at school? In October 1959, there are some names that came up. Fashion has caught up with college games clothes. There are new buildings. Just yesterday, we had declamations. And back there in October 59, declamations was judged by John Betjeman. The Poetry Society was going strong under Peter Way. the school performed the frogs in Greek. Patrick Moore was directing the Astronomical Society in the school. And there was a car club building or restoring a car in one of the garages around the back of the buildings. There was a lot of building work going on. And we're going to start with some contemporary culture, a whole new look for the boys of the time. So we've got long hair. What was your hair length like? What was the rule on hair? We've got the problem of mods or rockers. Which were you? These two have come from a drawing of a poem about where it was actually looking at Romeo and Juliet as mods and rockers. Dons are doing their bit for fashion, as you can see, giving the necessary lead. And there is Yardley aftershave lotion, this sort of thing that you might be splashing around. Did anybody use any of these? Did anyone talk to us about hair and fashion? No volunteers, everyone just shaking their head. I'll remember. Well, keep that in mind as the background.
One comment there on the hair. This is John in Texas.
Hello, John.
I did adopt the Beatles mop top haircut. At least that's what my mother called it. And I tried to maintain that for most of my life, but it's kind of there's not enough there anymore to give me that look.
Oh, I would say there's still a strong look of Paul McCartney.
That's another look. That's the look of a rather wild young man, if you could see it. Can you see it?
Oh, we can see that, Hamish. That is very wild. Yes, you joined in, I think,
68.
68.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that'd be 69.
So there is our Hamish.
Is Huddy.
Huddy. Yep. Keep pulling along to it. That's it.
There he is.
There he is. So many people, I think, will remember John Hudson.
Ashley Hudson.
That's it, Ashley Hudson.
You haven't changed at all, Hamish.
Oh, thank you. You should see my tummy. It has changed.
I don't know why people are silent about the Yardleys. I used to splash it on and think I was the absolute bee's knees.
Mention the assassination of Kennedy. I can remember that vividly because I was in the theatre with Nicholas Colchester, who some of you may remember. Sadly, no longer with us. And for some reason or other, it upset Nick and he burst into floods of tears. And I wasn't bothered about Americans aged 15, so, but I do remember it. We were rehearsing a social play, I think.
Right, so we've got JFK there, remembered. The CND marches. Cuba. I did read a comment in, I think it was the Radleian magazine, where she said, we heard about the Cuban Missile Crisis and we went to sleep and did not know if we would wake up again. Was there that element of fear?
Yes.
Yes.
No. I think there was in common room.
Yes.
There was in common room. Who else?
No, I think we checked that there was plenty in the cellar. So I mean, we were ready to go either way. Yeah.
I remember when it finished. And an HP came into Long Dormitory at rest time and announced that it was over, and there was a huge cheer. So we had survived it.
You were cheering for Kennedy's assassination.
At the end of it.
Oh, at the end, right? Yes, yes. Sorry, and at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yes. Well, we'll pick up some of the other. Yes.
The Film Society put on the sort of post-nuclear survivors film, and it was the only film where, when it finished, everyone just sat there, as you can imagine. It was grim, and looking back, I do wonder if that was an appropriate film to show because it was so shocking. But of course, it was very, very relevant.
Yes, I think that was it was called War Games.
Yes.
Was it? Yes. Yes, I saw the write-up of that and a statement that, yes, you all walked out silent because it was shocking. And I looked it up to see what was this film because I'd not heard of it. And it was indeed a very graphic semi-documentary or done in documentary style of a nuclear bomb falling on Kent, wasn't it? And it showed a family trying to work out what to do, whether to hide under the table and people just sort of boiling and vaporizing and so on. And I understand from looking it up that actually the government tried to ban it so that it shouldn't be seen. So whether it was appropriate is quite an interesting thing because they did think that it wasn't something that certainly children should be seeing. But actually the school showed it 2 years later, actually here in school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think it was entirely appropriate to show it. I think one forgets that it was only 20 years after the end of the last war, as it were. So all these things were much more present. The nuclear tests were going off. We've forgotten it now, but then it was much, much closer, much, much realer. 2 generations of our predecessors had been wiped out in wars. The Vietnam War was going on. It's all a bit different, thankfully.
Yes, David, you were talking about national service?
So, yes, I mean, I think national service had stopped, what, a couple of years in late 58, something like that, I can't remember. But I know otherwise most Radleians would have gone on after school and done national service. Yes.
Yes, it was very soon. I gathered that there was actually a group who went up. You've got the Aldermaston marches starting in 1963. So you've got the CND here with the CND symbol being shown for the first time. But there was certainly a group of Radleians who went up to an anti-nuclear march, I think in 1967, quite late on, but they were actually going to put on protest marches about it. So it was clearly very, very close to everything that you were doing. And one of the things we have at the moment with the young is this whole question of apocalypse. Do they have a future? Is climate change and the environmental problem going to mean that there is no point in them growing up, achieving anything, having children, and so on? But you were much closer to that sense of annihilation growing up in the 60s than any child now, surely. Did it affect your life view?
Yes, it's a slightly dark humour, really. About 10 years after well, a bit longer, 77-ish, in Buckinghamshire, I was possibly able to build a nuclear air raid shelter in the garden. And the county council in Aylesbury were singularly unimpressed. Oh, you better talk to the safety man. And all he said was, well, if you build it, we'll be kicking you out because the council will come and take it over. So a dark humour. But I did get the specs for an air raid shelter in Zurich from the Swiss because they handed out for anyone who wants to build one. We didn't.
And how do you stock it? That was always the question as well, wasn't it?
Precisely, yes. And water and air. It's a big, very big task.
Claire, I got a friend who was a contemporary of mine at Oxford, whose son has decided that there's definitely going to be a nuclear war. And so he's moved out of central London. He did have a house at Beckley, just up the road from here. He found that digging out the hillside there was not very successful. So he's moved to Stroud. So I'm not quite sure why Stroud is such a likely place to be, to be safe. But there he is anyway, and
Yeah,
given up
yeah.
London for the time being. So
Yes, I'm not sure about Stroud. My own house is in a village midway between the USAF at Fairford and the RAF at Brize Norton, and we kind of expect to be bang in the middle if anything happens.
oh dear.
So that's the background of what's going on, and we'll pick up some of the other themes as well. At Radley, there was a building project going on, and I'm absolutely astonished to see this. This is the whole new idea of classrooms that is coming in, and how to make one of the great public schools look like a 1960s comp is probably quite a challenge for an architect, but he seems to have achieved it. So you've got new classrooms going on, lots of open air and windows and so on.
Yeah, but they were horrible. They were hot in the summer and cold in the winter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, terribly hot.
Okay.
Malcolm Brady used to teach English in one of those, if I remember rightly.
Yes, I did. That is quite right. I didn't think the classrooms were as bad as all that. I wasn't acutely aware of this, the cold and the heat, I must admit. Perhaps I was too excited with what I was teaching, but...
You rushed around a lot, is my remembering anyway.
Can I just say, I must say, all this business of CND and all that sort of thing, I was at Radley from 61 to 65. And I have to say, in that particular, those 4 years, it was a sort of oasis of quiet, to be quite honest. It was very, very different, I think, from certain other schools and also the universities. I think the universities started the sort of rebellion much earlier, perhaps, than the schools. I have a feeling that if Radley ever did, and I question that, but if it ever did, it would have been in the late 60s, because I mean, we were much more concerned with what we were doing. I was incredibly impressed with Radley when I arrived. I mean, it was different from the school that I had personally been to, and it was different, as I soon learned when I went to Eton. I mean, Eton was much more rebellious than Radley was. It's really quite interesting. I'd like to hear from some of the other young men at the time, or boys at the time, whether they really were worried about things in the way that perhaps or certainly rebellious. I don't think we were rebellious at all.
I would agree with you, Michael. I mean, I remember Kennedy, but that was only because of Nick Colchester. But to be honest, I was blissfully unaware of what was happening in the wider world. I was much more focused on what was going on in Radley. And I spent a lot of time working on the stage and things like that. The battle seemed to be between things artistic and things on the pitches. So. And the tension between sport and other things.
Right.
I think academics, in my case, was probably all-consuming to me at the time, and therefore I agree very much with Michael Meredith that we were busy doing our normal everyday things at Radley, and really we were pretty much isolated from the outside world. And I didn't really feel that I came into contact with the outside world till I went to university in the late 60s. And that's when I was really aware of some protests at my university, Bristol. That there was sit-ins and so on there.
I would agree. I think we were very busy at that stage. Because I think a lot of us went through Radley in 4 years, rather than, or 4 and a bit years for college entrance. But it was quite intensive and a lot going on.
I think one really needs to look, Claire, at what was very special about Radley at that time. And I think there were two things, certainly, that were very special and different from other schools. And one was the chapel. The chapel was very, very positive. There was a very strong support. The hymn singing, the way that masters, dons and boys read lessons, which didn't happen in other schools. When I went to Eton, there was almost a sort of rebellion about in the chapel about boys who refused to sing. Well, I come from a school where everybody sung, and I think one of the other reasons was that the fact that Radley always had its chapel in the evening, and we used to meet the boys, and the boys met us going out of chapel. And I think that that also helped this. But it certainly, I was very, very impressed by the chapel, and in fact by religion, which wasn't pushed at you, but was there if you actually wanted it.
Well,
going back to the later 60s, I went in 1967, and I do quite vividly recall a slight shift, not only with the arrival of Dennis Silk, who clamped down on some boys who might have been dabbling in not just booze, but drugs as well. And it was that year when the Paris Revolution happened and flares began to appear on Radley boys. And there was just a little bit more of an awareness. Music, of course, became slightly more rock and roll, psychedelic and all of that. And I remember distinctly Jimi Hendrix, when he died, several boys from my house, actually, Berks's, wore black armbands into chapel, and Michael Yule, the sub-chaplain, said a prayer for Jimi Hendrix. So I think there was a growing awareness in the late 60s of things outside of school. That's what I remember.
Yes, when I went to Radley in 1965, I had the luck of going straight into the choir with Mr. Payne as presenter. And that was a very wonderful experience, very intense, the music every day, the services. That was a very wonderful experience. And music, although I turned out in the end to be a scientist, music was a very central part of my experience in Radley. So certainly chapel and the amazing organ with its two consoles, one down near the altar and then one up in the whatever you want to call it, I can't remember now.
Gallery.
Yeah, within the gallery, that's right. Yes.
Yes.
So really very, very impressive music and chapel at Radley.
One of the very best services in the chapel was always the carol service. It was at the end of the winter term, and everybody had had a long time, about 14 weeks in those days, for the term, and people were quite pleased to be sort of singing and getting away from the place for Christmas and that sort of stuff. There was always a lot of noise. And it was good noise. It really raised the rafters.
Yeah.
And the other thing I remember about Radley, we saw the photograph just now of the new classrooms, and I had the distinction of breaking one of the blackboards. I don't think many other people managed that. Anyway, it was green, and I think I probably achieved something else, but. I certainly remember breaking the blackboard. It was by the flick hockey pitches. There was always bad weather in the spring term, and those asphalt pitches were in regular use. And there was a stock of hockey balls and sticks in one of the classrooms, and they were brought out to help people sort of let off a bit of steam. And I found it appropriate to let off a bit of steam in the classroom rather than getting outside. And someone ducked, and rather than catch the ball, the ball went through the blackboard and there was an entry on the bill.
Well, we'll move on from those classrooms to see what else was being built. So we've got a new biology lab. And by the end of the 60s, a whole new subject, which was engineering. And here's the engineering lab. So you've got new subjects being introduced. There was also, I think in 1963 or 1964, I started to teach economics for the first time at A level. And a number of things. But the one that I really wanted just to focus on a little bit, you've already started to talk a little bit about the athletics track, which is great fun. The Cinder track opened in 1962. And I know that we have, I'm not sure if Harry Rycroft is on this call today, but he's been talking to us quite a lot about being captain of athletics and opening that track, running around it. And I've had one or two people who've spoken quite bitterly about the Cinder track. Does anybody else have memories of that?
I remember it being built, and I think Carl Brookman was master in charge of athletics, if I remember rightly.
Yes, Ken, I think.
Ken
Brookman.
Brookman, yes.
Yeah. Yes.
It was wondrously modern in those days. Now it would look very old-fashioned, but we thought it was the seventh wonder of the world.
Yes,
it was if you were going over one of those hurdles and fell in the water jump.
There are some quite astonishing photographs of that water jump, absolutely flooded all over the track.
Yeah.
So quite something to see. But if you wanted water, then I suspect this was the place to go.
Yeah.
The open air pool, which was dug out. We've got the Elizabethan garden wall behind it, parts of which still exist. Two or three tier diving board. Three. And for the first time ever, intersocial swimming sports. So you've got things like water polo being played and racing. And I know one of the big things about this was that it was actually open to the village and the local community. So when I was writing Untold Stories, we were sent a colour photo of some of the community from Radley Village using the pool in the summer.
I remember they had trouble when they were building it because the bottom of the diving pool was below the water table. So the concrete started coming up.
Right.
They had to fill it. They had to fill the pool before they finished building it to keep the bottom down.
Keep it down, right.
There was one small problem with it, Claire, and that was that it was only really open for 6 or 7 weeks in the summer. So obviously there was then a big demand to have it, well, not just roofed over, but completely recreated. And so we have what we have now. But in those early days, it was marvelous for common room, especially if you were around in the summer holidays, and you'd have sort of 12 people there, and so it was a very good thing for the dons. But the boys only had it for really quite a limited time.
I remember I took my swimming test in the river.
Yes.
Yes.
Because the swimming pool wasn't open yet.
Yeah.
Well, boys have been doing the swimming test in the river since the 1850s. So we've got some descriptions of that from small boys of that period. And presumably, if you're in the river, you've also got to deal with all sorts of things, the currents and so on, rather than the pool. I'm absolutely shocked that the pool was not used when you had to break the ice off it. That seems to me to be absolutely contrary to the whole idea of a public school education.
Well, it would be fashionable now. it would be fashionable now for cold water swimming.
Yes. Yeah.
I seem to remember there was a chap called Gordon Hill,
That was him.
Yes.
Yeah, I
who
remember.
was the superintendent or some something on the notepaper,
The chief.
and he had swum the channel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody was encouraged to think in large ideas, after leaving Radley. No, well, now there are various other things I could say, but I'm a bit facetious.
That's
Somebody
okay.
somebody wanted to go across the channel in an outboard bath, which would have needed a bit of swimming technique because it wouldn't have gone across the channel. Anyway, Gordon Hill seems to have managed it.
Touch.
2 points. One on athletics. I seem to remember we all had to do standards,
Yes.
which I hated, and we had to reach a certain level. And the second thing was, yes, I also did my bronze or my whatever it was swimming test in the river, and we had to dive for a brick, and the current was so strong we headed for Oxford. Thank you.
Well, standards. We were quite shocked to be talking to Shells last week in social prayers, and they had never heard the term standards, whereas every Don in the room thought we were still doing them. So we're not sure what's happened there, but we do. Standards have only stopped in the last couple of years, as we've lost that whole tradition.
The other point was about cold swimming in the pool. Was we actually all had to have a cold shower every morning, I seem to remember.
Plunge in a cold bath.
Punishment was cold bath for a minute. And
watch over by an HP.
Okay, so it wasn't that you had to have a cold bath; it's that you were punished by a cold bath.
You had to have a cold plunge every morning.
Yeah.
Right.
Or a cold shower you could have.
We didn't have showers, certainly in B social in the beginning of the 60s. It was a bath.
No, we had showers and a bath in F social, Crewsons, and I used to opt for the shower and sort of go right beside the wall and avoid getting wet.
that was the trick.
Or get up at 7 o'clock, and the HPs would all get up at 7:40. So you were well away by the time they were up and in the bathroom.
Yeah, I wasn't as keen as that to get up that early, I'm afraid.
You mentioned Gordon Hill, and which the next door building to the swimming pool was, of course, where the gymnastics went on, and he assisted Keith Bones, and of course led by Mr. Stoughton Harris, and for 10 years, or well, the 5 years I was there, we headed all the schools for gymnastics in the country, and Gordon and Keith and Mr. Stoughton Harris, we did 2 tours of Scandinavia representing British schools.
Yes.
It wasn't terribly successful because they didn't have school teams. They just put their under-21s on. And we had more success in the evenings, maybe elsewhere. No, they outclassed us. Scandinavians are very good at gymnastics, but of course they were all 3 years or more older than us.
Well, I think also they were a rather peculiar little group of things. I'm just going to flash through quickly to get to that. So we've got here's the captain of gym, and with it the orchestra, because were they not combined music and gymnastics tours? So you took the orchestra as well.
Sometimes. A little bit, yeah. I think certainly some of them.
Scan tours.
Scan tours, yes.
Yeah.
That's not me.
And they came over here too. So the scan pupils came over to England, and we went over there.
We had the British Olympic gymnastics team come and train at Radley a few times in 67, 68, I think, or 66, 67, which is an incredible honour and great fun.
Right.
The
the
gym
other-
was called the Barker, wasn't it?
It's called the Barker Gym. Yes.
The Barker Gym.
Yes.
And when you, as a new boy, you had a test, and one of the questions was, "What is the Barker?" And someone put down as the warden's dog, but that wasn't quite right.
Stig's test.
That brings us to New Boy's Nausea, where you learned those things before you had to sit the test.
College knowledge.
Yes, I've got a couple of copies of the New Boy's Guide, but was there actually one that was really called College Nausea?
New Boy's Nausea.
It was New Boy's Nausea, absolutely, Steve. Yeah,
And it was badly printed at St. Peter's Press.
and Warden Milligan walked down there one day and shut it down. He didn't like New Boy's Nausea, and he wouldn't allow it to be printed anymore.
Right, so actual censorship from the warden. Right. So the other one of the other new buildings was the boathouse in 1967, and there is work at the moment to raise funds, and there are plans afoot for a new boathouse because it's not stood the test of time terribly well, but it's been there since '67. And what I really like is the array of cars here. There's quite a lot of discussion about the Morris Mini or the Mini Morris coming up. So you've got the Minis here. You've also got a Volkswagen Beetle. And I know that David Anderson, the estates bursar, was very proud to discover that the man that designed the Mini, actually, while he was designing it, he was renting one of the houses, one of the college houses on Lodge Hill. So David is very keen that we should have a blue plaque put up there somewhere to say
That
this
would
is
be
where
Alec.
the Mini.
Alec Isigonis.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does anybody remember a number of Dons had Minis because they were the go-to car for the young men, I suppose, at the time. When boys managed to carry 2 Minis into hall and put them on high table.
John Wiley.
They weren't very heavy, which caused considerable consternation, along with somebody setting off the fire alarm middle of the day. I don't think the perpetrators were ever found out, but there was much angst.
Yeah, there were certainly 2 or 3 Minis that went up there, and I had a red one, and it had those sliding windows, and grass and stuff grew and where the windows slotted into the car, and but one was very proud of it. It wasn't there, but I wasn't a wet bob, so. But Minis were certainly around then.
I remember Warden Milligan's kids doing racing starts on the gravel in front of the mansion.
Yeah,
it was a left-hand drive because Mrs. Milligan was Greek, and so they went between.
So they went between the two.
Yeah.
And what we've also got is in the 1960s one of Radley's great rowing moments where they won the Princess Elizabeth Cup in 1962. As I recall, they won it in 1952, and before that, 1938. And from 62, it was 98 was the next time. So I was working on some of the rowing papers this morning, and there was a challenge that we're probably about due to win it again, although I believe the Princess Elizabeth Cup isn't something they can win anymore. I think they've changed the titles and the qualifications for it. But that was the 8 having a great moment. So let's move on a little. We've talked a little bit about contemporary culture. We've got things like the poetry and the folk concert. There is description of what was called progressive music, a group of boys who were taken into Oxford to listen to Jethro Tull. And there's quite a review of a Jethro Tull concert. pirate radio. What we also have is audio-visual tapes being used for the first time in modern languages in the mid 1960s. So we're really getting there with technology. And this is a book which has been cut open and contained pirates or secret radio, transistor radio, which was given to Peter Way by the father of the boy who had owned it.
I knew a lot of people that had those. We used to listen to Radio Luxembourg after dark, under the sheets.
208 meters.
Yep, that's right. Uncle Sam Costa.
I remember listening to all the pirate radio stations, actually probably shortly after I left Radley at the end of 1966. And all those DJs, the pirate radio stations were all shut down around about the summer of 1967. And all those disc jockeys from Radio London, Radio Caroline, and whatever else, they all suddenly turned up a few months later on BBC Radio 1.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yep. But there were still some of the greats. And John Peel started on Radio Caroline, didn't he? And was always, I think, the best of all of them. So
Tony
we've
Blackburn, gosh, yeah, they were all there.
And then we have various activities that were going on. And I'm presuming this photograph is the fire brigade practicing, unless it is a way of getting up and down the building.
That's e-social, I think.
E-social, Mr. Goldsmith leaning out the window.
Well, it might be.
Yes.
No, it's a bit boyish, I think, for him.
You think?
Looks a bit younger. That's DFG for sure.
Yeah, it's an e-social fire escape, a fire drill.
Yeah. That was attached to some sort of impeller that broke your fall.
They were the most dangerous things in the year, I think, really. I think rugby injuries and so on never had anything like the fear that one had when you had to try out all these very antiquated methods of getting people out. I mean, you could see how thin the rope is, and it was pretty old rope too.
Yep. It really wasn't that bad. It went down very slowly.
Well, you were probably less heavy than I, but look,
I don't know in those days, Hamish.
I tried them once, I think. I tried it once.
I went down in it once. It wasn't too bad.
Absolutely.
Rather fun.
Oh, well.
I ran the fire brigade my last year at Radley. And John Birkhead, who was master in charge of the fire brigade, he got us some new kit, because when I first joined, we had this huge, very heavy pump that we had to push around. We had a lot of fun doing it, but we did have one fire that we put out in the kitchens quite successfully, because John had got us equipped with the right kit rather than just a pump. We had dry foam fire extinguishers and blankets and all the stuff we need. We put out a chip fire in the kitchens, and then the fire brigade eventually turned up about 10 minutes after we put it out and tramped all over the roofs of the kitchen and did a huge amount of damage. But I can't imagine boys being allowed to put fires out nowadays.
No.
But we had a lot of fun doing that, not least when we had practices. It was a good excuse in the summer for great water fights.
I remember that chap in the photograph, the one that's looking to the right. His name was Botterill.
This one in the middle.
Yeah. Anthony, was it?
His name was Botterill. He was in e-social.
Yeah.
And I think the fellow on the extreme right.
This one?
I think that's a fellow called Fenwick Clennell. He was in Fishers.
Johnny Fenwick Clennell, yeah.
That's right.
So that would have been about 1966 or 67, I would think.
Probably earlier.
Well,
earlier. Maybe
I left in 65, so
yeah.
And they were a year behind me, so.
Fenwick Clennell was the same year as I was. I started in 61.
Yeah. He lived up in Northumberland.
Mm-hmm. He was known as Flannel.
Yeah. And he was a cousin of the Jeffreys boys.
Mm-hmm.
touching on the health and safety, a little comical thing was that I was in the Marionette Society, which, well, it's a fantastic value to me. But for some reason, I've been there in it for a couple of years, and the insurer came round to see what was going on at Radley. And I was asked to sort of show around the Marionette stage and the backstage. And we had all these earth clay pipes, which had been filled with concrete at one end and all standing on end. And a lot of apparatus. And he asked what the earth that was all for. And I said, well, it works really well. It's for dimming the lights. When you want floodlights, all you do is you fill it with salt water. You have one terminal of 240 volts at the bottom of the clay pipe, and the other on a lead weight on a piece of string and a pulley. And as you brought it closer together, of course, you got a brighter light. And it worked extremely well, but apparently the insurer wasn't very impressed. And we're either, I can't remember, or we must have gone to something a bit more modern after that. But yes, if you ever need a dimmer for your spotlight in the garden, clay pipe, bit of salt water, just split a wire, and away you go.
Mm-hmm. It was the same in the old gym before they put proper dimmers in, yeah.
We did do a Zoom call about the marionettes a couple of sessions back. So we need to add that into the history of the marionettes. It wasn't there at that point.
I can remember that Richard Morgan used to teach us English in the Marionette Theatre, and had us standing on the desks to perform during lessons, which was reminiscent of, or I was reminded of that when I saw Dead Poets Society a few years later on the film. But I don't know where the idea for Dead Poets Society came from, but certainly Richard Morgan used to make us do that.
Right. Well, we've got the Fire Brigade. We've also got all sorts of new societies. We've got the Archaeology Society.
That's Greenhouse there.
Right.
His name's Greenhouse.
Right.
Remember him.
And certainly some of the work is now being looked at again by Abingdon Museum, as we have various building projects going on around the town, because it was this Archaeology Society which did some of the preliminary work on that. What I also liked was the we've got things going in like the new bypass, the southern bypass, the A34, and one of the things that did was that it cut across the site of the deserted medieval village of Sugworth, which is still here as part of the grounds. But there was a lovely account of how British Rail would only allow the contractors to place 3 beams a day to put this bridge up for the road, because they didn't want to stop the trains. So when somebody is questioning how long it's taking to build a new road, it's because you can only do 3 beams a day on things like that. But what I also noticed when I was looking at it was that it was originally built in the 1960s there with built-in cycle paths and underpasses for bikes. And I'm not sure what's happened to those, but they were certainly forward-thinking about some of those things. We've also got the Meteorology Society with equipment up on the roof. And there was a point where the Science and Physics Societies had various equipment up on the roof as well, and they were measuring the sun's corona. So you're doing all sorts of exciting things just as societies. And this lovely photograph by Henderson, H.P. Henderson, relation, Nigel?
No. There were lots of Hendersons, but I wasn't related to any of them.
Right. But an absolutely lovely photograph of College Oak there in the snow. Somebody was talking about how cold it was. You remember him, Richard?
I remember yeah, he was in B Social, I think, and I remember the picture too.
Yes, he was B Social. He was a consultant surgeon later in life. That might well have been the winter of '62 when all the heating pipes were solid.
Yes, that really, really bitter cold winter.
Yeah,
that was.
You could sit in class in all your duffel coats and warm clothes and everything.
It was taken right by the sub-warden's house.
Yeah.
But then you could
there
go
was
skating.
skating on College Pond for weeks and weeks, probably all spring term of 63.
Claire,
Yes.
I think we should talk about one of the great things that Radley was ahead of all schools in the early 60s, and that was drama. We take it for granted, but there are very, very few schools in the country that not just merely had a junior play every year, a senior play every year, but also social drama. And if you look at the plays that were produced in social drama, they are really quite unusual and remarkable.
Yes.
I can remember David Pountney, for example, producing in his social an extraordinary play that he'd written himself from a novel about fox hunting, and it was really incredible. I mean, that a boy could do that, write it and then direct it. It was extraordinary, and it's not surprising that Pountney is now one of the greatest, I suppose, late 20th century, early 21st century opera directors. He learnt it here, and he learnt it because there was more drama at Radley than in any other school. When I got to Eton, there was no drama, period. We had to build a theatre. There was no drama. Drama was sneered at in most public schools at this time. Could I make one point about Peter Way, for example? When I was an undergraduate at Oxford, an old Radleian said to me, I think there's an unusual play going on at Radley. And so I went with him, first time I'd ever been to Radley. And the play, which was in the old
gym theatre, Michael.
The what?
The old gym theatre.
Yes, that's right. It was Edward II by Christopher Marlowe. Now, I mean, that was difficult to put on in the West End, let alone in a school. And Peter Cook, of course, under Peter Way, had been already in the 50s. It was extraordinary what was happening in drama here. It was not. Is there anybody here this evening who actually was in any of the plays at that time?
I never acted. I did all the backstage stuff.
Oh well, that was again John Birkhead, magnificent. I mean,
yeah, well, John Burke. I helped John Birkhead build the stage in the old gym, and it had a revolve in it. You see, they had terrible dry rot when it was properly converted into a decent theatre, which would have been what, 1961. So I think, Michael, when you arrived at Radley, the theatre was just being, because John had built himself in the carp shop the raised seating, because it had been flat before. So there was rate seating, and they got rid of the drain pipe dimmers and put proper and rewired the whole place so it was safe. I remember your production of Ross in there with Nick Colchester and others.
Well, yeah, that's right. The thing that also was very important is that certainly when I was there, we actually invited Donald Woolfit and his wife to come, and they gave a performance to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth.
I remember that.
Again, no other school in the country did this. I mean, Radley was ahead. It's very important that that's realised.
Well, I also remember we had trips to Stratford-upon-Avon to watch all the plays.
That's right. Yes, sure.
I'd just like to
You've now got on the screen. That's Peter Way's production of King Lear. Which I saw several of us here saw. Trevor Grove is playing King Lear. He had 10 days to learn the part because the boy originally playing it, whose name was Hughes, became ill and he couldn't do it. And so Trevor Grove did it in 10 days, and it was extraordinary. I mean, really special. I mean, that was the sort of thing that Peter Way could do. And before him, Charles Rynch. There've been some very important school directors at Radley, and better, as I said before, than probably in any other public school in the country.
There was
You've
a
forgotten forgotten one more element of the acting, and that was, of course, the Don's plays, which were the best.
Yes.
Yeah. They were great fun. That production of Hamlet was the first one I got involved with, so I must have been in fifth form, I guess.
That was a
Hamlet
junior.
was
That was a
played by
junior
John
play
Payne.
produced by James Batten. If it was Hamlet, and they did Hamlet and Lear.
King Lear, I meant.
I mean, it's extraordinary the quality of the plays they did then.
Yeah. I was a soldier in Hamlet with a cough.
I was in D Social with David Pountney, and I can remember in the social music competition, David Pountney composing a piece called "Do You Remember the Sea, Miranda? Do You Remember the Sea?" I was actually playing the violin, God help us. As I said, this was one of his very earliest compositions. Later on, he actually wrote the libretto for The Tempest. Of course, "Do You Remember the Sea, Miranda?" refers to the Tempest. And then, of course, David Pountney became very, very, very famous also for his productions in the Bregenz Opera Festival on Lake Constance. So I have direct experience with David Pountney, which I remember.
Yes, I was in Julius Caesar. Did you direct that, Michael?
I did, yes.
Because I remember, I mean, I was about 14 and I was playing Calpurnia, and you did it in French Revolutionary costume, sort of directoire. And I was a rather square little boy, and I was wearing this sort of directoire dress, which was meant to go in at the middle and didn't.
I have 2 photographs of you in it. Actually, you were extremely good, because we wanted Calpurnia not to be the sort of port. There's two women in Julius Caesar. One is Portia and one is Calpurnia, and so we actually wanted someone. I'm not going to say tubby, but we want somebody domestic. That was what we were looking for. And you were absolutely perfect at the time, and you were very good. You were very good. It worked very well.
Well, there is another recording that we've done. We did one of these Zoom calls about the Don's plays. So again, you can pick that up on the YouTube channel. But certainly, Kenneth Boyd's book on techniques of play production is still being used by drama teachers as a guide to how to do it. And the work that he did with saying that, yes, you could produce Shakespeare with boys. And obviously we've got Rynch working on the Greek plays. So we've got The Frogs was the other play that we were just looking at there. So clearly, one of the things that that you jogged me to do, Michael, is to actually look at what the social plays are, because you do tend to overlook them. But yes, it's true, they are producing some quite remarkable pieces of work.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Everybody says that Harrow was the school that was really top for drama, but that was just because they just did Shakespeare in one particular room. And I mean, I know I've seen the Harrow plays, and to be perfectly honest, they're not a patch on what Radley was producing. Certainly, that I've been lucky enough to, because I've been back from time to time to see some of the plays here, and they really are. I mean, you really have got to sort of. You doesn't like to promote oneself too much, but one thing that Radley was really good at. Rowing was superb when I was there. Cricket, Dexter and thing. Of course, I remember all of that. I was a cricketer, but really the plays were the things that were so remarkable.
The other thing that was the new gym was used for, or the old gym, was it? Was music, and modern music. We've touched on it with Oberon. Was rather frowned upon. I mean, the classics was the thing. And there was a jazz hut down in the garden. We had to practice there because we made too much noise, and it wasn't appropriate, apparently. And anyway, we were in there. It was quite cold sometimes. And the door opened, and this nose came in, followed by the rest of silk. And I think he was thinking that we were all smoking and, you know, misbehaving or something. And we just started a song by Country Joe and the Fish. I can't remember what it was called. And this chap came in, and we kept him waiting because it was our place. It wasn't his. He could go into the garden if he wanted to, but the jazz hut was where we practiced. So we finished this thing, and then he said, jolly good, and then left us to it. But I think the music at the end of term, certainly the summer term, there used to be a concert of one sort or another, which was encouraged because the boys would come along and sit and listen very dutifully. And it would prevent them from doing other pranks around the college, like sort of emptying the college pond and stuff like that. So there was actually a place for it, which was useful, although the actual music was rather frowned upon by the powers that be. Thank you.
So the other thing that happened in the old gym was declamations.
Yes.
I got into trouble with Warden Milligan because I learned quite a lot of Winnie the Pooh, and I have to say, expertly coached by Malcolm Reynolds, but I made it through to the final, much to my annoyance. And I was sent for by the warden and ticked off for bringing the declamations into disrepute by reciting Winnie the Pooh. But there we go.
Peter Cook would have admired you, David.
Well, actually, when you read Winnie the Pooh carefully, there's some quite interesting stuff. But there we go. It was frowned upon at the time.
When John Betterman judged declamations, he actually gave the award, I think, in the fifth form to his nephew, which we all thought was very unfair.
Yes.
Was that why he was asked, I wonder, as well as being Poet Laureate?
I received an icy stare from Warden Milligan at declamations after reciting a Stanley Holloway Old Sam monologue with a northern accent. And I was the look from Warden Milligan was that no, we don't do that at Radley.
I know the feeling.
Well, the other thing we might not have done is the Film Society was obviously a very big thing, and one of the great sadnesses is that we do not have a surviving copy of the Scholar Gypsy. We don't have a surviving copy of the 139th Psalm, which they won all sorts of awards. And someone was asking recently about Michael Reeves, because of course the Witchfinder General is still a cult film. So film was another one of those things which was being done by societies. I don't know if anybody remembers that. They were, as we still do now, filming things like rowing and the athletics and so on for training purposes as well. But I think we
used to do a lot of showing of films, of topical films. But I don't know whether he was involved in making them. I don't think so.
Right.
Well, Michael Reeves, he was certainly he had all the latest LPs, if I remember rightly. He was very keen about film even then.
Oh well, I gather he was part of the mover and shaker to take the Film Society up to London to watch all the latest films, and may have been the reason why they went to see the War Game when it came out. We were talking about earlier.
But some of us went with Michael to see The Lion in Winter
and
the West End. I don't know whether you remember that, but John Burkhead, Michael Hart, and one or two others, we all went to see The Lion in Winter with Catherine Hepburn. And can't remember why, but anyway, it was fun.
My only
Right.
memory of film at Radley was in 1963 when the young ones came out, Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and most of the school wanted to bicycle into Oxford to see it, much to the dismay of tutors.
Yes, you weren't allowed to go to the cinema, were you?
Well, it was frowned upon, but we managed to mostly go on that occasion.
I don't know if I should be ashamed or proud or owe the Cinema Society lots of money, because in my years at Radley, I watched an awful lot of films on the Saturday night, the top floor of the science block. And I was one of the gymnasts, and I always climbed up the drain pipe and through the toilet window. And I never actually had to pay, which I'm not sure if that's good or bad. But anyway, if you want to come and collect the whatever it was, 10p of film or 50p, I suppose I owe that.
Remember going into Oxford one evening, and obviously, you know, one of the destinations was a pub, and I went in and saw standing at the bar one of the dons. Can't remember his name, Holman, I think. And so I went straight into the gents in order to avoid embarrassment. And when I came out, he was still there, and he said, "Oh, Westrop." And I thought, "Oh God, what's happening now?" And he said, "Oh, what time's the last bus?" And so I managed to escape on that occasion. Thank you.
One of your photos you showed was of the aeroplane of the Air Force section of the CCF, which went to a whole sort of 20 feet and could go about 50 yards. I indeed flew that, and it unintentionally actually meant I went into aviation. I think it certainly got me into it, and I spent 50 years flying and training pilots in the UK.
Based on the Slingsby glider.
Well, it got me. Obviously, I always had an interest because I thought it was fun and a bit dangerous, but we had good fun.
Yes, there are also a lot of memories about Theodora, which people keep saying. And I believe somebody has written to us recently to say that he's tracked down Theodora. She has a new name, but she is still in service, still sailing.
Was that your boat, Victor? Oh, can I just, oops. So I'm unmuted. Theodora, was that taken over by the Ocean Youth Club? Because
yes.
My wife actually went on a trip to Holland and back, and they managed to have a skipper who wasn't quite, well, didn't read the forecast properly, and it was a major rescue. We had Lancaster sort of Coast Guard planes searching for it, and I think the Navy sent out a destroyer or some ship, and they were all rescued, but definitely sinking and not in a good shape. But it is indeed around, and it's been down in Falmouth for quite a while. I'm not sure where it is now, but and a very interesting history, yes.
Right.
What else we have?
I think it's time to go.
I think it is time that we drew this to a halt. We talked about that, this. People that you remember.
Just mentioning the 1966 Football World Cup.
Well, I was struck that was not mentioned in any Radley publication. So yes, to talk about it.
No football in those days. It was frowned upon.
No, that's true.
I think I need to go now. I think.
I mentioned the fact, Claire, in a recent communication with RadSoc, and I actually was in the Old Radleian, our expedition to Iceland in 1966.
Yes.
When we came back into Reykjavik from the interior after 2 months or whatever, with total lack of communication with the outside world, we heard that England had won the World Cup, and I got my A-level results.
Yes, yes, the World Cup wasn't mentioned, and neither actually was the moon landing. There are a number of things about space exploration and jokes about space, but the things that don't happen during school term time don't happen. And that is one of the interesting things. If you're trying to reconstruct a history, you have to remember that half the time the school is not here. So we need to draw this to a close now. It's been wonderful to hear from you all. Yes, somebody's got off to do the importance of being earnest. So that's great. There will be a recording. There is a number of things we're gathering now on YouTube. So you can listen back. A number of people have also been sending us a lot of memories, which Sophie is building together into an online sway guide. And what you're doing is helping us to create a really informal oral history of the school. And it's wonderful that everybody is chipping in so much that we just overrun on any of our allocated time. So thank you very much for coming. Sophie, over to you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us, particularly to the Dons that were on the call, Michael Meredith and Hamish Ed. So thank you to both of you for making it, and to everyone for chipping in. We've overrun because there's just so much to say, and that's a wonderful thing to be overrunning for, and a thing to celebrate as well. So thank you. Our next Radley Then and Now will take place in May, and it will focus on the most popular building in Radley, Shop. So please, ahead of that, share your memories with us by email, and we'll really look forward to seeing you there on the call, and we can all do this again, and you can all chip in with your memories. That'd be great. Thank you so much for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, Michael.